Welcome to the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham. If you have a comment, email it to me, box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives and check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/Great Detectives. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software. I do want to encourage you to check out my wife's business, Ashira Clips, at lilarose.com/Ashira. There she sells a wide variety of different headbands, hairpins, and hair clips to suit a variety of different styles and taste. That's lilarose.com/Ashira. But now let's get into this week's episode of Mr. Chameleon. The original air date August 17th, 1949, and the title is The Case of the Murdered Movie Star.
Next, Mr. Chameleon and the Case of the Murdered Movie Star. Tonight, we again present the famous Mr. Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters in his famous cases of crime and murder, brought to you by the makers of genuine Bayer Aspirin. Mr. Chameleon, as you know, is the famous and dreaded detective who frequently uses a disguise to track down a killer, a disguise which at all times is recognized by the audience. Tonight, we give you Mr. Chameleon in the Case of the Murdered Movie Star. The success of a great star depends largely on his followers, and Richard Stratton, the famous screen star, knows this very well. But as he pushes his way through the autograph fans who surround him at the entrance to Martone's restaurant, his famous face is strained and frightened, and he says to his manager, Dirk Rogers,
"Get those people out of the way, Dirk. Can't stand it. Autograph hunters. Why can't I be left alone? It's driving me mad."
So you say, but all right. Sorry, folks, Mr. Stratton can't stop now. Now let him through, please.
But please, Mr. Stratton, you're so divine. Please, just once for my autograph.
I promised my kid sister I'd get your autograph. What are you trying to do, high-hatters? You're not forgetting where you're public, are you?
Get out of my way, you... Open that door, Dirk. Get me out of this.
Baloney, this sort of thing is meat and gravy for you, Stratton, you punk.
Shut up, kid. Let go of Mr. Stratton's arm. Hop inside, Stratton.
It's razzed every nerve in my body, Dirk.
What's the matter with you, Richard? You act afraid of those autograph hunters. Most of them are youngsters.
That boy wasn't a youngster.
Well, you're inside and safe now. The great romantic favorite, Richard Stratton, is safe from his adoring admirers. Safe as a little puppy in his box.
That's enough from you, Dirk. I wonder if Polly's here yet. I want to get this luncheon over with.
I should think you would. Here's Martone, the manager.
Mr. Dirk Rogers and Mr. Richard Stratton. My restaurant is honored, greatly honored.
Thank you, Martone. Do you have a private dining room for me?
The little gold one, Mr. Stratton, your favorite spot. I should take you there.
Don't bother, Martone. We know where it is. You're busy.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. It is my rush hour, but I will look in later, Mr. Stratton.
Come on, Richard.
Dirk, I hate to face Polly.
You, the great star who can handle any situation?
Forget it, Dirk. Come have luncheon with us.
Sorry, Richard. I'm lunching by myself in the main dining room. Here's the gold room, your favorite private dining room. See you later.
Well, there's nothing to do but get this over with. I hope Polly's here, not late as usual. The room's empty. There's no one here. Oh, you. I didn't see you. Oh, what's that? Stop it! Oh, you shot me! You shot me!
And a little later, Mr. Chameleon, the astute and dreaded detective, is driving in a squad car toward Martone's famous restaurant. And with him is Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold, who is saying,
Well, here we are, Mr. Chameleon. Hey, look at that mob on the sidewalk, will you?
Just a few of Richard Stratton's many admirers. The great star of the screen, the darling of society. And now he's dead. Murdered, Dave.
Let's go.
Gee, it's a cop.
What did they get the police for?
Let us through, please.
Wait a minute, Mr. Chameleon.
Maud, how do you know me? Who are you?
I seen your picture in the papers, Mr. Chameleon, and I'm a fan of Richard Stratton's. Is he dead? Is he, huh?
Yes. No, hey, wait, I want to talk to you. Wait!
The kid's gone, Mr. Chameleon. Slipped right through the crowd.
Did you see that kid's face, Dave? Very old face for such a young body.
Yeah, I didn't notice. All right, let us through here, will you? Come on, let us into the restaurant. One side.
Oh, here's Martone, the owner.
Oh, Mr. Chameleon, this is awful. Richard Stratton murdered in my restaurant.
Where's Richard Stratton's body, Martone?
In that private dining room where the waiter found him. But no one heard a shot, Mr. Chameleon.
Probably because it's so noisy here. Come along, Dave. Get to you later, Martone.
Oh, Mr. Chameleon, Mrs. Stratton is with her husband's body. She was lunching here with a friend. Such a lovely woman. Fine people they do. The cream of society.
Including a murderer, Martone. You are Mrs. Stratton?
Yes.
I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters. This is Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold. I want to look at Mr. Stratton's body.
Shot through the heart, Mr. Chameleon.
Mm-hmm. Shot through the heart, Dave, at fairly close range. Dave, wait here for the coroner and search this room thoroughly. Mrs. Stratton, will you please step in this room? I must ask you a few questions.
Oh, couldn't they wait?
No, I'm afraid not. Your husband was murdered. Every second is important if I'm to find the murderer. You sit down, please. I shan't take long.
You take as long as you please. Nothing matters, of course, except... Oh, Mr. Chameleon. Richard was such a wonderful husband. He was such a great star. Why was he killed?
Mrs. Stratton, I understand that you were here at this restaurant with a friend having lunch at the time of the murder. Were you all lunching in the private dining room?
No, I was in the main dining room. I didn't even know Richard was lunching here until the waiter ran out screaming he was dead. Oh, the shock.
I quite understand, so I'll be brief. Mrs. Stratton, were you and your husband having any trouble between you?
Certainly not. We were devoted.
Do you know who your husband was lunching with in this private dining room?
Why, Dirk, I suppose. His manager, Dirk Rogers.
You hesitated over that name. Why?
Mr. Chameleon.
Is there something about Dirk Rogers that troubles you? What is it? Were he and your husband on bad terms?
Yes. There was...
Well, go on, Mrs. Stratton.
He discharged Dirk yesterday, Mr. Chameleon. He had to.
How long had Mr. Rogers been your husband's manager?
10 years, since the beginning of Richard's career as an actor. But Richard had to let him go. He'd outgrown Dirk.
I see. Is Dirk Rogers here in the restaurant now?
I saw him sitting in Martone's office.
Thank you, Mrs. Stratton. I suggest that you go home, and I promise that I'll do my best to find your husband's murderer.
Thank you.
I wonder if you'd mind telling Dirk Rogers that I would like to see him in here immediately?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon. I'll send him in.
Thank you. So Dirk Rogers was fired, After 10 years. 10 years of service and then chucked out. Now, that can't be very pleasant. That could... Come in. Dirk Rogers, I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters.
Yes, I heard that the great Mr. Chameleon was working on the case. Well, why not? The great romantic figure of the screen is murdered, so naturally a great detective appears to catch his murderer. First line billing for all.
You hated Richard Stratton, didn't you, Mr. Rogers?
Why, no.
You sure?
Yes. Old Richard was difficult at times. He had his little quirks.
Such as?
Well, he hated crowds, especially those young autograph hunters outside. He acted afraid of them, said they weren't all harmless kids.
When did he say that?
Just today, Mr. Chameleon. And he had an absolute phobia against racetracks and betting on races. He made that an excuse for...
For firing you, Mr. Rogers?
That's it. That's why he fired me. If gambling, he said, for irresponsibility. After 10 years of working to make him what he was, he kicked me out.
And yet you say that you didn't hate him, Mr. Rogers. I say that it's possible that you hated him enough to kill him.
No, Mr. Chameleon.
Is that why you turned so pale? Because you're not the killer, Mr. Rogers? And why do you keep glancing toward the door all the time? Is there someone out there?
No, come back here, Mr. Chameleon.
Not till I find out. Well, young lady, come in. Just who are you? And why are you eavesdropping?
Mr. Chameleon, this girl is a friend of mine.
She was also Stratton's leading lady. I recognize her now. You're Polly Dawes, aren't you?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
And why are you here?
I came to meet Dirk Rogers.
You sure you didn't come to meet Richard Stratton? Wasn't it you who was going to lunch with him in that private dining room where he was murdered?
No.
Let her answer, Mr. Rogers. Well, Polly Dawes?
No. I told you I came here to meet Dirk Rogers.
Polly Dawes, if you're lying, it's a mistake. All I have to do is call Martone, who runs this restaurant.
All right. I'll tell you everything. Yes, I came to see Richard Stratton. I shouldn't have, but I had to.
You mean you were in love with him? Isn't that what you mean, Polly Dawes?
Sweetheart, don't answer.
Keep out of this, Mr. Rogers. Richard Stratton was murdered, and I want the truth. All right, Polly. Were you deliberately pursuing Richard Stratton when he had no time for you?
No time for her. Richard was chasing Polly everywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I thought I'd get a rise out of you. So Richard Stratton pursued you, Polly, and then he threw you over.
Who told you that, Mr. Chameleon? His wife, Veronica?
No. You just told me, Polly. And besides, a man who'd throw out his manager after 10 years' service wouldn't hesitate to discard a woman he was tired of.
Oh, Dirk.
It's all right, Polly. It'll be all right. We've both handled this stupidly, but it'll be all right, darling.
Mr. Chameleon, can you come here? I've got something to show you.
Coming, Dave. Of course, you understand, Mr. Rogers, your being in love with Polly Dawes doesn't help your case any. So hold yourself ready. I want to question you later.
How's it going, Mr. Chameleon?
Dave, the famous screen star Richard Stratton was not the gentleman at heart that he was in appearance. Both his manager, Dirk Rogers, and his leading lady, Polly Dawes, wanted him dead. And they had very good reason, I'd say. What is it you want to show me?
Look here, Mr. Chameleon. This window in the private dining room where Stratton was murdered opens into an alley. And there's the footprint of a child on that windowsill.
Uh-huh. Child's footprint and the dust on that windowsill. That's odd.
Do you suppose one of those kids outside, those autograph hunters, tried to climb through the window?
Well, maybe. Richard Stratton was afraid of them, Dave, or afraid of one of them. Why? How could one of those youngsters harm him?
Remember that kid who stopped us outside? He had a face that'd stop a clock.
Yes, it was an old face, Dave, not the face of an adolescent. He had the body of a boy. He could have made this footprint, but... Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
What's the matter, Mr. Chameleon?
Dave, Richard Stratton's manager told me something very interesting. That Richard Stratton had a perfect fixation against racetracks and racing.
Well, what's that lead to, Mr. Chameleon?
What sort of a man is it that has the body of a boy? A jockey. A jockey.
Yeah, but what's the connection?
Between Richard Stratton and a jockey? Well, on the face of it, none. But I have a hunch there may be a sinister connection somewhere. Come on.
Where to, Mr. Chameleon?
Well, first we're going to send out a general alarm for that boy or jockey or whatever he is.
Right.
And then we'll patrol that part of 8th Avenue, Dave, where all the racetrack people in New York hang out. We're going to look for that boy's face that you said would stop a clock. The boy who was outside when we came in here. The one who knew who I was and started to say something and then disappeared. He may tell us why Richard Stratton was so afraid of the world of horse racing.
And later, Mr. Chameleon and Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold are walking along 8th Avenue, searching the crowds in vain when a squad car pulls up beside them. The familiar voice of the Commissioner of Police says,
Well, Chameleon, any luck? Have you found your needle in the haystack?
Hello, Commissioner. No, so far, no luck. You think I'm on the wrong track, don't you?
Chameleon, I put you on this case. It's your baby. Just don't fail, that's all I ask. Oh, but here's what I wanted to tell you. Early this morning, Polly Dawes tried to commit suicide.
What?
Yes, that could or it could not be a confession of guilt. Also, Richard Stratton's widow, Veronica Stratton, has asked for police protection. She received a threatening phone call.
Where is she now?
Staying with the Van Duryers on their Long Island estate. She and her husband traveled in fine company. Far from 8th Avenue.
I know you do think I've gone far afield. But, Commissioner... Dave! Dave, there he is! You see him, the boy who isn't a boy? Who spoke to us outside Stratton's restaurant?
You're right, Mr. Chameleon. And he sees us, too. He's trying to get away.
You there! Stop!
Stop or we'll shoot.
No, hold it, Dave. The crowds are too heavy. Stop that boy! Stop him! Stop him!
Now we've got a clear space. I'll fire my gun into the air. That stopped him.
All right, kid. Don't try to get away again. And don't struggle.
What do you want? I didn't do nothing. What do you want?
You know who I am, young man. When I met you outside of Martone's restaurant, you addressed me by name. Now suppose you give me your name.
Okay. I'll give it to you. My name is Toby Stratton.
Stratton? Did you say Stratton?
You heard me, Mr. Chameleon. I'm Toby Stratton, the jockey. And I'm Richard Stratton's brother. And I'm glad that phony so-and-so is dead. He deserved to die.
Mr. Chameleon and the case of the murdered movie star continues in just a moment. The two most important kinds of relief to anyone suffering from ordinary headache, neuritic, or neuralgic pain are fast relief and gentle, dependable relief. And genuine Bayer aspirin gives you both. It's amazingly fast because it's ready to go to work in 2 seconds. And it's completely dependable because its single active ingredient is so gentle to the system, mothers give it even to small children on their doctor's advice. Add to this the fact that no other pain reliever can match Bayer aspirin's record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. And it's easy to see why Bayer aspirin is one thing you can take with utmost confidence. So don't experiment with drugs that have not stood the test of time. For fast relief and for the dependable relief that's important to your health, do as millions do. Use Bayer aspirin. When you buy, ask for it by its full name, Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. And now, back to Mr. Chameleon and the case of the murdered movie star. The shooting of Richard Stratton, first gentleman of the screen, has led Mr. Chameleon into strange byways. And now, after a wild chase on 8th Avenue, he has captured a young jockey named Toby Stratton. And in his office at Central Police Headquarters, he confronts the disheveled man, saying to him,
"Why, this is fantastic. That you should claim to be the brother of a famous and aristocratic man like Richard Stratton."
Aristocratic? And that phony? Our father was a racetrack tout. We were raised around racetracks. We slept with the horses. But my brother Richard always hated it, Mr. Chameleon. He always wanted to be somebody.
Toby, can you prove that you're Richard Stratton's brother?
You bet I can prove it. I got papers to prove it.
Then you were blackmailing him.
No.
Yes, you were, Toby. When Richard Stratton became famous and wealthy and pretended he came from a fine old family, that is when you moved in and began to blackmail him.
No, I tell you, I never took a penny from him.
Well, then why'd you hang around with his autograph fans? Why did you climb through that restaurant window into the private dining room where he was murdered?
Because I wanted to see him. But he was dead when I got there. Somebody'd already bumped him off.
You mean you killed him when he refused to go on giving you money?
I told you, Mr. Chameleon, I never asked for money. Not after the time he turned me down.
So he did turn you down. Now we're getting somewhere. When did he do that?
2 years ago. Just before my father died. His father, too, Mr. Chameleon, who didn't have enough to eat. That's what Dad died from. Not enough to eat. I wrote to Richard for help. He said he didn't know us. He warned me to keep away from him. The dirty so-and-so.
So you hated your brother, Richard?
Why shouldn't I? You see your motto up there over your desk? The innocent must be protected. The guilty must be punished. Well, what was my father guilty of? Except that he was poor and what Richard called common. That's all the poor old guy was guilty of.
Well, you feel by not sending money, Richard killed your father?
You bet I do.
So you, in turn, murdered Richard?
No.
You murdered your brother. That was your way of revenging for your father?
No. But I got my revenge, all right. Before he died, I used to follow him. Wherever Richard went, there I was, to remind him of what he came from. He was beginning to crack, too.
How do you mean, Toby?
Last week, he almost spoke to me. He would have soon. He would have blown his top and spilled the beans that I was his brother.
Toby, did you know Richard's wife, Veronica?
Sure. Her old man was a stable hand at the track.
A stable hand?
Yeah. Then she got a bit part in the pictures, married Richard, and both of them went high society.
Well, the movie magazines always portrayed them as coming from top-drawer families.
And they had a good press agent.
I wonder...
Well, what's the matter, Mr. Chameleon? What are you looking at me for so funny?
I was just thinking, Toby.
Well, don't look at me. I tell you, I didn't kill my brother.
That remains to be seen, Toby. I warn you that you're under suspicion of murder.
You haven't got anything on me.
Don't be too sure. Okay, you can go.
And I won't be back.
Don't be too sure of that either. Dave.
Yeah, Mr. Chameleon?
Did you give orders to Detective Foley to shadow Toby Stratton from the time he left this building?
They won't let that jockey out of sight.
Good.
What's the score, Mr. Chameleon?
Well, the score is piling up with a vengeance, Dave. Richard Stratton may have played the perfect gentleman on the screen, but his greatest talent may have been in concealing the fact from his worthless socialite friends that he was the son of a poor racetrack tout.
Hey, what a story this'll make when it hits the newspapers.
Yes, exactly, Dave. What a story. What a shock to the social circles in which Richard Stratton and his wife Veronica moved. Stuyvesant Clark's, Van Duyer's. Dave?
Yeah?
Call Richard Stratton's widow Veronica, Dirk Rogers his manager, and Polly Dawes his leading lady. Tell them I want them at Martone's restaurant tomorrow morning to reconstruct the murder of Richard Stratton there at the scene of the crime.
What about his brother, Toby Stratton?
Well, we keep him out of it for the moment. But a friend of his will be there, a friend of Richard Stratton's father, talkative old racetrack hanger-on named Paddy Riley.
You mean you're going to disguise yourself as this Paddy Riley?
Yes, Dave. Martone, the restaurant owner, will have to be told, otherwise I'd never get into the place. But I'm counting on Paddy Riley to stir up a hornet's nest. There will not be a reenactment of the shooting. Instead, there'll be a second shooting.
And so, Mr. Chameleon, in the picturesque disguise of Paddy Riley, an old racetrack hanger-on, goes to Martone's noted restaurant. And we hear him saying to Martone, in the voice of Paddy Riley,
I hear that Mr. Chameleon, the famous detective, is here. I got news for him, chum, so let me in.
I'm sorry you cannot come into the restaurant, Marton.
Oh, can't I, Martone? Do you want a bed?
Voila, Mr. Chameleon. Even though I knew you were coming, I did not recognize you in that disguise. Come in. They're all here. Mrs. Stratton is in my office. Polly Dawes and Mr. Rogers are in another private room. That one over there.
Good. Now, just vanish, Martone.
Paddy Riley can find his way around.
Very well, Mr. Chameleon. You think you are perfectly safe?
Paddy Riley never worries about his personal safety. No, sir, Paddy Riley isn't afraid to talk. He's not scared to shoot his mouth off to Mr. Chameleon. Where is Mr. Chameleon? I wondered if he's in here. Oh, excuse me.
What do you want? Who are you?
Paddy Riley at your service? And you're Polly Dawes, the actress. Ah, I've seen you many times in the pictures. Where is Mr. Chameleon?
What do you want with Mr. Chameleon?
I want to give him the lowdown on Richard Stratton.
What? What do you mean? Dirk! Dirk, come here!
What is it, Polly, darling? Who's this character?
Paddy Riley at your service? An old friend of the Richard Stratton family.
What? How could you be a friend of Richard Stratton's family?
Ah, that's my secret. I'll give you a little tip. I follow the horses, and I know Richard and his father well.
I'm Dirk Rogers. I was Richard Stratton's manager for years. You're either drunk or crazy.
I still want to say Mr. Chameleon, the detective.
Dirk, what do we do?
Mr. Riley, why don't you wait here in this other room? I'll go look for Mr. Chameleon.
Now you're talking. Tell him I got big news for him about Richard Stratton. I know why he was murdered.
Okay. You just wait in here. Now, I'll close this door and just sit down and wait.
Sure, I'll do that. Ah, what an elegant dining room. All in gold. And this is the room where Richard Stratton was murdered. I don't like that. No, sir. I don't like it at all. Who is that opening the door? And what is that in the crack? Heaven help us, it looks like the muzzle of a gun. Oh! You killed me! Okay, Dave, get her!
I've got her, Mr. Chameleon. Give me that gun. Give me that gun.
Mrs. Stratton, give that gun to Dave Arnold. That's better. You got it, Dave?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon. This is it.
You must be mad. And who are you? Well, you sound like Mr. Chameleon, but you look like some low creature from the racetrack.
A remarkable statement from the daughter of a stable hand.
What?
You're no more the person you claim to be than I am Riley, the racetrack hanger-on that I impersonated.
What?
You missed killing me, Veronica Stratton, because I'm wearing a bulletproof vest. Your murdered husband didn't have that protection.
I didn't kill my husband. Dirk Rogers, his manager, or Polly Dawes killed him, one or the other. They had reason to kill him. I didn't.
Then why'd you try to kill me? I'll answer it for you.
I wasn't trying to kill anybody.
You tried to kill me because you thought I was Paddy Riley. Here to tell the world that your husband's father was not top-draw society, but a common racetrack tout.
No.
His brother, a broken-down jockey, and you, the daughter of a stable hand.
Stop, it's not true. It's not true.
Veronica Stratton, you've carefully built a place for yourself in what your distorted mind believed high social circles. In a madness of social climbing, you forgot that prominence and success from a humble beginning are something to be proud of.
I'm not of humble origin.
And you killed your famous film star husband because he was ready to acknowledge his brother. Toby, the brother, told me that himself.
Oh.
And that was more than you could take. It meant that your whole house of cards would collapse.
Richard Toby. Richard couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing his brother Toby all the time. He was going to let the whole story out. He was mad. He was going to bring Toby to live with us. I couldn't let him bring that disgrace on me. I just couldn't.
Mrs. Stratton, your kind of social climber never ceases to amaze me. To you, murder is less disgraceful than a poor family background. It's a type of thinking I'll never understand.
Shall I arrest her, Mr. Chameleon?
Yes, Dave. She's confessed. Fantastic murder. With a fantastic motive.
And with these words, Mr. Chameleon concludes tonight's murder case. Next time an ordinary headache threatens to spoil your plans, get fast relief by taking Bayer Aspirin. You'll be amazed at how quickly Bayer Aspirin works. And the reason is that these tablets start to disintegrate within 2 seconds after you take them. To see for yourself that this is true, just drop a Bayer Aspirin tablet in a glass of water and watch what happens. Before it reaches the bottom of the glass, it will begin to disintegrate. It does the same thing in your stomach. Hence, brings relief with astonishing speed. Yes, and Bayer Aspirin is dependable, too. No other pain reliever can match its record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. When you buy, ask for it by name, Bayer Aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer Aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. Listen next Wednesday night at the same time for Mr. Chameleon, the man of many faces, in The Vacation Murder Case. The part of Mr. Chameleon is played by Karl Swenson, with dialogue by Marie Baumer and Frank Hummert, from the original story by Frank and Ann Hummert. Music directed by Victor Arden. Your announcer is Warren Sweeney.
Thanks to a remarkable scientific discovery, you now can actually help prevent cavities. What you do is use new ammoniated Dr. Lyon's tooth powder. Based on a formula developed by University of Illinois scientists, it destroys bacteria, Lactobacillus acidophilus, which cause cavities. Thus, it not only cuts down tooth decay, but pain, worry, and expense as well. That's why so many dentists are recommending this type dentifrice. So, to cut down tooth decay, to have sounder, healthier, handsomer teeth, use ammoniated Dr. Lyons tooth powder. Both regular Dr. Lyons tooth powder and new ammoniated Dr. Lyons are at all drug and toilet goods counters.
Listen for Mr. Chameleon in the Vacation Murder Case next Wednesday night at this time. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Welcome back. This whole concept of entertainers coming up with false backstories is definitely something that has happened, and not just during the golden age of entertainment. I would say that it actually isn't just a situation where people will fake having a richer background. Sometimes it can cut both ways. People will actually make their origins appear humbler than they are, or somehow different or more edgy. I've heard of hip-hop artists trying to hide that they actually went to nice school in the suburbs. That doesn't quite give you street cred. And of course, there are still others who will hide how urban or rural their upbringing might have been. Because as an audience, people often have an expectation of what a great talent is going to look like and what their overall personalities will be. It's one of those great challenges when you have a gift in an area such as acting or singing, and you've got to conform yourself to a certain image. We've heard many people on radio whose work in visual mediums were often limited by factors they couldn't control or were unable or unwilling to change themselves to fit whatever image was expected of them. I don't feel like that's what's actually being talked about in this episode. In many ways, it's a bit of a recurring theme with the Hummerts, of people pretending to be wealthy and to put on these airs, but they aren't. Unlike a story where you have a fake nobleman trying to con their way into a rich family by marrying an heiress, you have a couple who care so much about what others think that they actually value the opinion of rich snobs over human life. I think the brother was right that their father died as a result of the actor's neglect. And of course, she killed her husband to protect her place in society and avoid her lie being uncovered. And this might be one of the really odd things about the Hummers. Really, so many of their serials that they produce, not all of them certainly, but many focused on the goings-on with the great and the good. A lot of wealthy, famous people, but they didn't have a really strong patience for the idea of putting on airs. There are vices that each generation really tends to hate. In our time, hypocrisy may be the thing that's hated the most. I think that snobbery might have been the most universally hated vice or attitude during this time period. Now, obviously, there were exceptions that many made, for things we might consider snobbery because it conformed to their racial attitudes or something else. But I think that beyond that, the idea of looking down on someone and high-hatting them or thinking less of them because you happen to come from money or have gotten money was something that was really strongly hated, and I would say almost universally despised in pop culture. And certainly the Hummert's work reflects that. Now, I've spent some time on some serious analysis. I will note that the whole conversation with the brother was a bit challenging at times. We talk about the writing on this, but there was this one part where he says that as a result of his brother's action, his father died, and that his father was also his brother's father. Why didn't you just refer to your father as his inaction led to the death of our father? That would have been clear. I mean, I can kind of get that sort of verbiage if you're talking about a situation where it was a stepfather, but that was just painfully convoluted. We also learned this episode that without Chameleon present, Dave Arnold has the impulse control of a child, as he had to be told, don't fire your gun into the crowd. Don't kill innocent civilians who are standing there because we are trying to get the attention of someone we want to question. I kind of feel that if you are a police officer and Mr. Chameleon has to explain something that basic to you about the operation of your gun, you should not be carrying a gun. With that, though, we turn to listener comments and feedback, and we start with a comment over on Spotify. Peter writes regarding the episode, The Snapshot in the Park Murder Case, is it wrong that I prefer Karl Weber's performance over Karl Swenson's? Today's episode was a nice change of pace from Swenson's recent performance as an increasingly grouchy Mr. Chameleon. Well, I would never say it was wrong, but I'll be interested to hear what other listeners have to say on that, Peter. It's kind of interesting because I remember back when we played Inspector Thorne in, I think it was season 6 or season 7, everyone was talking about how mean and pushy and shouty Karl Weber was in those first 7 or 9 episodes that he played Inspector Thorne. So that's an interesting perspective for that reason. I do wonder whether Chameleon seeming increasingly grouchy was partially due to fatigue. You know, as an actor, you hate to have anything interfere with your performance or your energy. But Karl Swenson was a busy man. He wasn't just doing Mr. Chameleon. He was doing at least 2 other daytime soaps in addition to whatever guest appearances that he was making. So if you had been performing Mr. Chameleon scripts for like 51 straight weeks, you might be a little grouchy too. Although I tend to think that might be more the writing, you know, given the way that Chameleon in this episode, I have a sense that he realized when he actually talked with the brother that he didn't do it. And then when the brother's like, I'm not coming back here, you're not going to end up questioning me again, Mr. Chameleon starts arguing with him. Like, oh, you think just because you didn't do it and I realized that you didn't do it, that you're somehow out of this case? No, mister. I'm the detective here. Now, that might be more the script than anything else. Then we also have a comment from Alexis, and Alexis writes, is the actor who plays Chameleon in other radio shows. I want to know if his angry style of talking to pretty much everyone but police is his usual performance style. Demanding to know why the ex-criminal was near the crime scene when a sentence ago the ex-criminal just explained that he lives across the road at the trade school seemed like he simply doesn't listen. Well, thanks so much for the question, Alexis. And yes, Karl Swenson was in other radio shows. A lot of other radio shows, although many of them are lost, or we just don't have voice cast for all of the programs that he was in. But he was in quite a few other things. We played him starring in Father Brown back in our second season, and I think he generally played that a lot lighter and a lot softer, except for one scene where I think it was kind of appropriate to get a little bit shouty when he did the adaptation of the Three Tools of Death. He also starred in this daily serial called Lorenzo Jones, where he played an eccentric inventor. And it's kind of a comedy soap opera. Honestly, I was a little disappointed that there weren't more episodes in it, particularly from the 40s, where they let it be that. And he plays this kind of good-natured but eccentric inventor. In addition, he was in Argyle Sunday, which I've not really listened to, don't really have any interest, but he played the love interest of Sunday, her husband, Lord Henry Brenthrope. And then I've heard him in some anthology programs. He played the lead in the romance adaptation of Our Man Godfrey. And I also heard him play the Pied Piper, and that's just a few of the roles that he played. So certainly he was an actor with range, and really I think most of the issues with the performance come down to the script. And I think in that case it was less a case of Chameleon, the character, not listening, that it would be a case where the Hummerts thought perhaps the audience might have missed it. I do think that there are some spots where I kind of can understand the general philosophy of how they made the show, but there are some points where I don't think they give the audience enough credit. And that may have been one of them. Thanks for the question, Alexis. And Alexis also gave a 5-star rating to the Snapshot in the Park murder case, and also to the Dangerous Assignment episode, Capture James C. Stoller. So thank you so much for rating us over there. And thank you to Francesca, who gave a 5-star rating to the case of Murder and the Scarface Man. Then we had another comment on Spotify, where Harrison actually wrote regarding the Thin Man episode, The Moon Murder, why did the taxi driver sound like Mr. Chameleon going undercover as a taxi driver? Well, I can't be certain on that, Harrison. I'm not as good at recognizing most New York radio actors. I think I'm a little better at Hollywood, still not perfect on everything. But it would not surprise me at all if Karl Swenson had played the role of a taxi driver. He was very talented, very in demand, and certainly willing to work in the radio acting business. Just because you had 2 feature roles in a daytime serial doesn't mean that you rest on your laurels. As I was talking about, I believe it was last week, about radio acting being more of a situation of gigs rather than jobs, people worked a lot, took on a lot of these, little small roles, even if they had bigger roles in other series, because it's part of the economics of making a living in radio. Probably the radio voices that I'm picking out in New York City the most are Ralph Bell, Larry Haynes, and Maurice Tarplin. And it would not surprise me in the least if it was Karl Swenson. And I would not expect to catch Karl Swenson, given what we've heard on Mr. Chameleon and his ability to change voices. Speaking of that, we have a couple emails. First, Jay writes, I agreed with your comments that Mr. Chameleon's butler voice in this episode was good. The plots are silly, but Karl Swenson's ability to switch voices is very impressive. I like to imagine Mr. Chameleon delivering his speeches about how he caught the bad guys while in costume, this time in the butler's uniform. Pity he hasn't had to impersonate a ballet dancer. Keep up the good work. Well, you never know. We are still relatively early in the series, and I suspect we have quite a few more episodes that'll come into circulation. And then Rich offers Mr. Chameleon feedback from today's episode. I've been carpooling with my 20-year-old daughter for several months, and I've introduced her to your podcast over this time. I asked her a hypothetical question today about which great detective she would like to invite over for dinner, and she chose Mr. Chameleon as he would be able to serve as butler, chef, etc. She did worry that he would start yelling at us when he was not in disguise, and I can't argue with her on that. Keep up the great work, and we both enjoy hearing your podcast while we commute. All the best, Richard. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Appreciate both of you listening and you introducing your daughter to the podcast as you do what is called in the industry co-listening. That is the term for when you listen to the podcast with someone else, be it spouse, child, or whatever. And this has actually been put out there as this big new thing in the podcast world, where it's like co-listening is this brand new thing. And I'm like, no, this has been going on for years and years. I can definitely sympathize with her choice, and I think she's got some good reasoning behind it. Probably the potential of yelling would outweigh that. It's tough for me. I think that the Falcon would not be particularly fun because really he's all about trying to find a date, and I couldn't help him, and so I think he would just kind of be distracted. I don't think we could put out a fancy enough spread for Bulldog Drummond, the sort of British gentleman detective. I don't think we would be interesting enough for Steve Mitchell. He, when he's back in the States, he wants to find some sort of deal, and we don't do deals, like, at all. Mr. Chameleon we've covered. I think I would like to have Friday and Romero over for dinner, but the thing is that they would get interrupted and leave before we even ate. That would have the benefit of them not overstaying their welcome, but, you kind of at least would like them to make it through the meal. I think if I were to have someone over, it would have to be Johnny Dollar, because Johnny is very genuine, he's polite, but he's just the type of person that it seems like you'd like to hang around with. And honestly, that's probably the big strength of Johnny Dollar as a series, because, there are weaknesses in the plots and mysteries, but the way Bob Bailey performs them, he just seems like a real down-to-earth sort of guy who just, sit right up to the table and have interesting things to say and just be fun to be around. I will say there are probably some other detectives in our archive I might consider more fondly, like Harry Craig. I really love. I would love to have him over. And there are others, but I think of the current, definitely Johnny Dollar. All right, and I want to acknowledge Thanks for the upload from Jerry on YouTube regarding the case of murder in the Scarface Man. And now I want to go ahead and thank our Patreon supporter of the day. And I want to go ahead and thank Laura. Laura's been one of our Patreon supporters since June of 2020, supporting the show at the Shamus level of $4 or more per month. Thank you so much for your support, Laura. And that will actually do it for today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software. And be sure to rate and review the podcast wherever you download it from. We will be back next Wednesday as we begin Broadway's My Beat. And then next Thursday, we'll be back with another episode of Mr. Chameleon. But join us back here tomorrow for yours truly, Johnny Dollar, where...
Paul, I know you're there. Now answer me.
Yes, Grandmother.
You go on downstairs. I want to talk with Mr. Dollar in private.
Whatever you say.
And close that door. Don't mind my back, Mr. Dollar. I couldn't see you if I looked into your face. Now then, when are you going to arrest that crook and bring my Lincoln speech back to me?
Well, I'm going to need a lot of help and information, Mrs. Meek.
Mm-hmm. What kind of information?
Mostly about the museum.
Like what?
Well, do you know who was in there the night the manuscript disappeared?
Certainly. The dirty robber was.
Anyone else?
Well, old Pete's always there. Supposed to be guarding the place, but he didn't do a very good job the other night. Got himself slugged.
I hope you'll be with us then. In the meantime, send your comments to box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives and check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/Great Detectives. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.